at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Corey Adams. You may begin.
Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to OPM's Employee Engagement Webinar. We're very happy to announce this is one of three of our webinar series for this month, next month in October, and wrapping up with the third one in November. We have stepped out on this initiative in regards to employee engagement we know this is a very important time for the employee engagement community as it relates to the FEVS cycle, as agencies start to receive results from our FEVS team and begin their analysis and action planning. We thought this was again a great opportunity to share some knowledge, best practices, and some resources to help the employee engagement community. And so for today's webinar, we're going to be focused on a really great and exciting tool that we've been developing over the last year for first-line supervisors, a toolkit for first-line supervisors specifically. And I'm happy to say that we're being joined today with employee engagement partners from the Department of Energy, who's going to share their work in linking FEVS data with important outcomes that we know that are very important when making the business case of employee engagement. But before we get too far started, I would like to just cover a few logistics. As you can see that we have a Q&A box over to the right side, center right side of your screen. We do not plan to have an open session over the line today. However, we encourage everyone, as you have questions as we are going through the webinar, to input any questions that you may have for myself or featured speakers. We do have staff on hand that will be monitoring the Q&A box that will try to respond to your questions accordingly. But also, I'm being joined as well by my colleagues, Dr. Shayla Vergas Osuna and Dr. Alexis Brown, who will also be facilitating the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar based on selected general questions that we think that will be good for the group, again, at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So last year, the current presidential administration set forth some very bold objectives outlined in a president management agenda focused on mission, service, and stewardship. And within those, there were a lot of cross-agency priority goals outlined and sub-goals and associated milestones, particularly as it relates to employee engagement, focused on people and trying to meet, the needs and things that in order for us to be successful in regards to the 21st century workforce. One of the key milestones that were outlined in that agenda was what many of you all may affectionately know as the 2020 by 2020 initiative for employee engagement, where basically in concert with OMB, OPM, asked all agencies to develop strategies focusing on the lower 20% work units to improve employee engagement scores by 20% by the year 2020. That particular engagement kicked off in October 2018. We're right now kind of dealing in the middle of the cycle of that initiative. And again, this particular webinar series, along with other different tools and resources that OPM and again in partnership with other agencies have been working on to try to help agencies within those initiatives. Some of the things that we had done over the last couple of years, again working towards some of the things we've developed, was conducted research internally and externally across government. One being with working with OMB, who established a Tiger team back in 2017 to look across federal government at lower scoring work units in the lower work components of organizations to determine why or what were some of the drivers associated with lower FEVS scores. And so there was a lot of great information that came from that, which we'll touch on here in a second. But one of the key things were, we always focused on what are some of the things that contribute towards the higher scoring work units. Again, this was a more of an initiative of trying to understand some of the challenges at the lower work units that wasn't necessarily doing so well. Another thing that we have done in last year, particularly as it relates to OPM initiatives specifically, is looked at trend analysis across government FEVS data, using FEVS data to understand where there may be pockets of success in trying to achieve 20% improvements of employee engagement scores over small windows of time. And throughout that analysis, we did identify several agencies that were able to make 15, 20+% improvements in their engagement scores within a 2 to 3 year period. We did some interviews and focus groups and so forth, deep dives, if you will, to understand what was some of the successes attributed to the increases in a short period of time. And again, that goes into developing some of the things I want to share with you today. And finally, finally, in response to the President Management Agenda as it relates to specifically the sub-goal related to the milestone in improving agencies by 20% by 2020. We work with a committee representing various agencies, large and small, and trying to understand what are the challenges associated at the practitioner level, from the practitioner perspective in employee engagement, those who are charged with the responsibility for improving engagement throughout their organization. And so we collected that information as well. And again, in order to develop tools and resources specifically to help agencies. And one of the main things that we want to feature today or talk about, or want to put a plug in, well, before I say that, let's hit on the key things that came out of the research I just cited. So there's three major things that came out of the research that I just talked about on the previous slide. One was, we identified where, a lot of supervisors, everything I should say, was related to the frontline supervisor. And one of those key elements that was associated as a challenge was competing priorities with the organization's mission. As engagement practitioners, anecdotally, we know or we realize, developing employee engagement strategies and at the organizational level and at work unit levels is a part of our role. However, throughout the research, we were, the idea of supervisors are not necessarily focused on that every day because they have other, goals that they have to focus on that's more related to their mission and not necessarily people-centric. Another key thing that we identified was first-line supervisors lack the training and or skills to efficiently evaluate and interpret FEVS results. Not necessarily not having the skills, but being able to do it in an efficient manner. And so, again, that was one of the key notable things that we recognized that was a challenge at that level. And then finally, the limited interpersonal skills to overcome communication barriers within, with staff. And what I mean by that, is basically one of the trends that we notice is, supervisors ideally, particularly in certain occupations, spend a lot of time in developing their craft, their skills, their talent in non-management roles, and then they move on in advancement of their careers into supervisory roles, and best may not necessarily have the opportunity to develop the interpersonal skills that are more warranted at that level or within those roles of supervision of others. And so we took some reflection of these key elements or these key findings in conjunction with others, and again move forward to think about how can we help practitioners, employee engagement practitioners, and other HR professionals help their supervisors in this capacity, and as it relates to trying to improve engagement. So in response to these things, OPM, we developed, again, a toolkit for supervisors that covers four major areas within, from a guide perspective, including um, PDF-style guides that are on a web-based platform, also along with videos that serve as tutorials on these various processes. These processes include reviewing survey results to gain insights, uh, um, uh, best practices in sharing survey results and soliciting input and trying to improve results, simple approaches to action planning, and also leadership for engagement. And what I mean by leadership for engagement, that really hits on those interpersonal skills. We look at this, the first portion of the guide that we've developed. Again, it's the survey results and trying to gain insights basically covers some of the highlights again and best practices to efficiently best use the tools and resources that are ideally available in most and not if not all agencies in order to be able to do so and help supervisors understand some of the more simple and practical ways on how to interpret their data and understanding what numbers are the most meaningful to them as it relates to what providing context of where they may fall as it means to their parent work, or their sister work unit, their organization, and then government wide as a whole. Again, also highlighting tools that are accessible to all across government and other ways of being able to other ways to be able to assess the data again in a more meaningful but efficient way. The second part of the guidance is really trying to assist supervisors in understanding this, understanding the results. I'm sorry, sharing the results and soliciting input. At the end of the day, going beyond the numbers. One of the key things that we find a lot is ideally a pitfall when we talk about analyzing FEVS results is a lot of people put a lot of focus on the numbers, but it's important, especially in the supervisor's role, taking advantage of that opportunity, working in small teams, working in small groups, to be able to take the opportunity to go beyond the numbers and also solicit input to understand why the numbers are the way they are. Whether the numbers represent challenges that provides an opportunity of improvement, or whether numbers provide bright spots on where the organization or the work unit is doing well, and learning what is driving those bright spots in order for sustainment. But again, this is just a portion of the tool that will provide best practices, simple ways, simple approaches, example of things to ask, and so forth in order to go through that process. The third portion of the guide is simple approaches to action planning. Your basic fundamentals of identifying, well, what can we do about the challenges or opportunities for improvement, or look at ways on how we can sustain the great things that a work organization is doing at the supervisory level or at the team level. Uh, Again, going through those basic opportunities of thinking what is low-hanging fruit that you can, ideally solve over a short period of time, but also thinking about what can you identify as long-range goals that may be a year or 2 year down the road before you really achieve the outcomes that you want. And I think that's something that important to understand. And these are things again as also outlined in greater detail in the guide as far as understanding you do have short term, you do have long term goals, and understanding the level of commitment of seeing those goals through in order to support an environment that fosters improvement for engagement. And finally, leadership for engagement, as I mentioned earlier, this really gets after thinking about the interpersonal skills that are critical for supervisors in order to be successful. And we like to refer to it as the employee-focused mindset. This particular portion of the guide really provides a lot of examples, a lot of do's, a lot of don'ts, a lot of pitfalls to avoid when it comes to communicating with employees, um, taking best practices from coaching and other areas of relationship building, again, in order to foster positive improvements with engagement. when working with staff and other employees throughout that journey. So, in good fashion, one of the things that we wanted to do is be able to share the guide today. However, we have not received 100% clearance to do so as of today. However, once the guide is fully approved for release, which we anticipate over the next couple of weeks, it will be available on this web platform. This is just a mock-up, just as an example. For all you all who are currently registered for this webinar, we have all names within our registration database. Will be emailed a copy of this toolkit via the link to access and be able to use and distribute across your organization. Again, we apologize that it's not necessarily available today. However, we do anticipate that to be available here in the coming weeks. And if, again, as someone registered for this webinar, you will receive a direct email noting this release and access to the actual tool guide. So now I'd like to go ahead and shift gears a little bit and introduce our featured speakers for today. Again, we're very fortunate to be joined today by the U.S. Department of Energy, and we have my colleague John Walsh, Jason Ha, and Matthew, right? Kimberly Matthew. That's Kimberly Matthew. And so I will now turn it over to Jason Walsh, who's the leader of the pack, and let's get started.
All right, great. Thank you, Corey. I appreciate you and OPM inviting us to be part of this first webinar. We're really happy to be here. My name is John Walsh. I'm the director of our Office of Talent Management within the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer at DOE, the Department of Energy. I also serve as the Chief Learning Officer for our organization. And we're here to talk about the evolution that we've undergone in terms of our engagement program, moving from merely just sharing the FEVS data and the FEVS results that are provided from OPM to building our own organizational analytics and targeted analysis of those results, and then using that targeted analysis to work with our program leadership to identify and actionalize strategies to drive performance through engagement. I'm happy to have Kimberly Matthews-Williams and Jason Ha here with me today as members of our engagement team within our Workforce and Organization Development Division to talk about that evolution and highlight some of the lessons learned that we've experienced along the way. So, Kimberly?
Thank you, John. So, as we all know, organizations with high employee engagement achieve high performance results. Engaged employees speak positively about their organization to coworkers, friends, family, and others outside the organization, which could be potential applicants or customers. Engaged employees have a strong interest in being part of the organization and contributing that extra effort that helps ensure the organization's success. Today, Jason and I are here to share with you some information on how we at the Department of Energy are utilizing strategies and practices from Gallup to inform organizational employee engagement action planning. We hope that by using Gallup's engagement practices and organizational development strategies, we're able to help organizations in our agency to increase employee performance, lower turnover rates, and reduce absenteeism while producing a byproduct, which is an increased employee engagement index score. We developed this product out of our need to provide the department's senior leadership with a tool which could easily and clearly demonstrate the business impact of the effects of higher employee engagement in an organization. My colleague Jason Ha will give you a little background on what we've been doing at DOE, how we got to where we are, and he will illustrate the correlation between a high engagement score and organizational performance absenteeism, and turnover rates. Jason?
Thank you, Kimberly. Hello, everyone. This is Jason Ha. Before I start sharing how we measure engagement and organizational outcomes, I would like to share with you about how we started with the FEVS. Back in 2015, DOE utilized the agency management report and designed the organizational management report to help organizations better understand the FEVS results. DOE response rates has increased in 2016. Last year, DOE distributed over 600 OMR to all organizations, from Tier 1 organization down to the lowest tier organization with a minimum of 10 responses. The organizational management report has 3 different types of analysis: the strength analysis, comparative analysis, and trend analysis. The data table on the left side highlights the top 10 positive, neutral, and negative response. It also highlights the strength, uncertainty, and challenge areas. For the comparative analysis, it compared work unit current result with the same year result for up to 3 higher level organizations within the work unit reporting structure. The trend analysis tracked the work unit survey result over a 5-year time period result when available. So this is an overview of the organizational management report. Gallup has done extensive research collecting, analyzing, and measuring engagement data across private industry. Gallup has identified 9 areas directly correlated to employee engagement. According to Gallup analysis, highly engaged organizations have lower turnover, lower absenteeism, higher productivity, fewer safety incidents, and as well as other organizational outcomes. As DOE Engagement Index score has increased in 2015, we took a step little further to find the impacts and the benefit of the engagement to help supervisors and leaders better understanding why engagement is important. We look for opportunity to align with Gallup analysis. At DOE, we are able to measure 3 areas that correlated to engagement. We are able to measure turnover, absenteeism, and productivity. This chart compares highly engaged organizations to low engaged organizations and compared to DOE overall with FY18 data. These 2 organizations are the Tier 1 organization at DOE. As you can see, the turnover rate is much lower in highly engaged organizations compared to low engaged organizations. That is more than 400% in difference. Next is absenteeism. It is true that highly engaged employee is less likely to take sick leave. In this highly engaged organization, the average sick leave year per employee was 29 hours. Compared to this low engaged organization, the average sick leave year per employee was 93 hours. That is more than 200% in difference. And the average sick leave amount cost per employee is about $3,800 in difference. So in this data show that highly engaged employees tend to use less sick leave than less engaged employees. In this stacked bar graph represent employee performance results. In this highly engaged organization, 64% rated significantly exceed, while only 12% rated significantly exceed in this low engaged organization. Again, that is more than 400% in difference. So these are the 3 areas we are able to measure and align with Gallup analysis. We also look for opportunity to find other organizational outcomes. According to other research, trust and recommend organizations are also correlated to employee engagement. Please look at the chart on the left side. Highly engaged organizations have more trust between employees, supervisors, and leaders. In this highly engaged organization, about 6 out of 7 employees trust their management, while only 1 out of 2 employees trust their management in this low engaged organization. Please look at the chart on the right side. Highly engaged employees are more likely to recommend their organization. In this highly engaged organization, About 4 out of 5 employees recommend their organization as the best place to work. In this low engaged organization, on the other hand, about 1 out of 3 employees recommend their organization. So we know the impacts and benefits of having a highly engaged organization. Now the question is, how can we change from a low engaged organization to a highly engaged organization? For that, I will turn it back to my colleague, Kimberly Matthew Williams.
Thank you, Jason. So Jason shared with you the analytical results that the data reveals what a highly engaged workforce produces. I'd like to share with you the products that we develop to help organizations achieve higher employee engagement. From an organizational chart perspective, our team is located within the Office of Talent Management's Workforce and Organizational Development Division. This allows us access to the department's organizational development specialists as well as the human resource workforce development specialists. What does this mean? And how did this help, right? So it means that when we work with an organization to increase its employee engagement, we utilize every specialty that resides in our division. And as demonstrated in this product that we produced, the organizational development specialist contributed to this product by providing direction on the crosswalk process for determining which organization development strategies best fit or best match the 71 FEVS questions, along with the human resource development specialist or the organizational development specialist, and they help to create open-ended focus group questions that are specifically designed to get to the root cause of issues. Additionally, the human resource development specialist conducted or facilitated focus group sessions for organizations and provided feedback to their managers, which included possible strategies for addressing the unveiled root cause for the issues. Now, what does the Gallup project look like? How does this all come together? This is what the Gallup project looks like. So Gallup breaks engagement down into 3 major subsets, areas, or factors. And studies have shown that engagement is directly impacted based on these 3 factors. These factors are communication, consistency, coworkers, and supervisors. So let's start with communication. Communication relates to the purpose and feedback that's exchanged at work. Communication should be frequent, two-way, and allow for open dialogue. Consistency relates to the regularity of management policies and procedures. And finally, coworkers and supervisors relates to the issues or issues under the control of others in the workplace, so issues that are outside of self. We melded Gallup's employee engagement practices and organizational development strategies. So that's going to be your column 1 and 2. We melded those with the crosswalked FEVS questions and open-ended focus group questions designed to get to the root causes. That's going to be columns 3 and 4, to create an opportunity for higher engagement within an organization. And we did that for all 3 areas: communication, consistency, and coworkers and supervisors. Now, this is where it all comes together. We take the first thing, which Jason told you about, the Organizational Management Report, the OMR. So organizations are given their FEVS results via the OMR. We go to the second piece of that, which is the Gallup project that I just defined for you. We utilize the Gallup project with the 3 areas: communication, consistency, coworkers, and supervisors. Step 3, we conduct employee focus group sessions and then provide feedback from those sessions to the organization's managers with suggested possible organization strategies for improvement. And then finally, we offer the employee engagement playbook to the managers. The employee engagement playbook was originally intended for our organizations that we identified in our 2020 project, as spoken to you by Corey, who gave you information on what the 2020 project was, or the initiative. The Employee Engagement Playbook is designed to outline specific actions as well as give specific strategies that can be used by leaders to improve their organization's employee engagement index scores. The Employee Engagement Playbook provides guidance on setting the organization's baseline, creating an action plan, communicating that action plan with the employees within the organization, and then finally implementing the strategies to drive that engagement in the organization. The Employee Engagement Action Plan template is what we suggest that managers within the organization use to actually conduct or set up the template, the action plan. The action plan consists of 5 steps. The process is a 5-step process. Step 1, interpret your engagement data. So you've got different tools, or we give different tools to managers for them to interpret their engagement data. And with that, it takes you to step 2, setting your engagement baseline, setting the organization's engagement baseline, where you are. So that's going to enable you to draw your trends, to have a stepping stone so you know where you're going to be going. Step 3, establish your goals and create the action plan, which is what the template allows you to do. Step 4, communicate the action plan. And that's where managers and supervisors sit down with their employees and the staff and talk through the action plan so that the action plan is able to get built so it can go forward. And finally, implementing the action plan. The implementation is the day-to-day building of the action plan, the day-to-day implementation, the day-to-day strategies that are used to go forward with this action plan. Through implementing the action plan, it allows for the bigger implementation, and that's for the culture of engagement. So the culture of engagement enables an organization to have increased employee engagement, which will produce the byproduct of an increased engagement, an increased employee engagement index score. We're not chasing scores. What we're doing is trying to implement cultural changes. By implementing that cultural change, you get the byproduct, the natural byproduct of an increased employee engagement score. Therefore, leading to a higher performing organization. As I stated early on, when an employee is engaged, when you have a high employee engagement score, when you have employees that are highly engaged, they're vested in the organization. I don't say I work at DOE, I say I am DOE. I don't just work in HC, I am HC. I'm vested. And if I'm vested, then HC becomes a higher performing organization. And as HC becomes a higher performing organization, the Department of Energy becomes a higher performing agency. And so that's what we strive to do at the Department of Energy. We think locally, but we think globally, but we act locally. So we approach it one organization at a time, and not even one organization, one division, one team at a time. And as we build on that process, we're able to expand, and engagement becomes culturally ingrained. And as it becomes culturally ingrained, the byproduct is twofold. It's an increased employee engagement score, as well as a high-performing organization. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, so thank you, Kimberly and Jason and John. What key takeaway before we get right off into questions is, first and foremost, thank you for that very well explained and detailed approach that you all have successfully identified within your organization. Some of the key things I wanted to circle back on, and as it relates to some of the things I mentioned earlier, was the importance of the first line supervisor, playing that critical role in improving engagement. Again, we have acknowledged from the top of our journey with trying to help and support agencies, starting from a couple of years ago, that supervisors are not only constrained with competing priorities, again, if it, skill sets or wherewithal to conduct analyses and evaluations and action plans in an efficient manner, and also maybe lacking interpersonal skills and so forth. But with all of that being said, understanding how some of these various approaches and strategies can help overcome those type of challenges. And one of the key things that I think that was very important and notable from what Jason and Kimberly just shared was the outcomes of when all of those unique things come together that drives, actually, at the end of the day, employee engagement index is a byproduct of those culminating efforts that all comes together when it comes to really trying to drive positive behavioral change and a supportive culture that become a place where employees can thrive and be their best. But with that being said, I do want to now transition into our question and answer session, which I'll be assisted with my colleague, Dr. Alexis Brown, who's been monitoring the chat box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box. And we'll now turn it over for any questions that she has highlighted that would be good for the audience, and myself, Department of Energy, can respond to accordingly. Alexis?
Hi, Corey. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. Yes, we can.
All right, very good. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that great presentation. And we have a number of questions. We've chosen just a few that we think will be helpful for the entire audience. One of the questions is, what is the criteria for defining both the low and the highly engaged organization? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? What criteria you use to define low and highly engaged organizations?
So thank you for that question. This is John. I'm going to speak to this and invite Jason to jump in with any oversteps that I make. But in essence, what we did at the Department of Energy is you heard Kimberly and Jason talk about our Tier 1 organizations. So we've identified data all the way down to an individual, a team unit. As long as there are 10 respondents within an organization, we can generate an individual organizational management report, or OMR, for that organization. But that, as Jason mentioned, we have over 600 of these OMRs, so that really opened us up to a lot of possibilities for how to work within the PMA structure and the 2020 requirement within our organization. But where we decided to go was to look at that Tier 1 organization and identify. We rated our organizations according to the Employee Engagement Index, and then we know that OPM identifies 65% or higher as a strength threshold, and so we looked for organizations that were at or below that level. And then we simply just did a mathematical equation to identify the bottom 20% from that ranking, and then we pulled them together as a kind of a community of practice to work directly with those organizations.
Sounds good. Thanks, John. Alexis, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a few more questions, and I just got a message that some people are having a hard time hearing me, so I hope that I'm speaking up loudly for everybody to hear. One other question was data separated from remote employees and on-site employees when you were doing your exploration, and if so, were any major differences identified?
So that is an interesting question. We have not really looked at engagement by remote or against our telework responses. We have broken it out by occupational series. We've taken a look at male and female, veteran and non-veteran, but we haven't yet explored telework versus non-telework employees. So that is something that I think that is organizationally driven. If you have an organization that really leverages telework, or that is exploring the use of telework, I can see a lot of value in looking at engagement scores in that way. It's not a question that has come up within our organization, which is one of the reasons why we haven't looked at it. But it's great that OPM provides data to get to that answer. We just haven't done that yet.
Sounds good. Thanks, John.
Awesome. Do we have time for another one, Corey?
Yes, we have time for several more if there are some there.
Okay. There are a couple more that I think would be helpful for everybody. Another question is there an entire staff, or how many individuals were dedicated to running the program that you described? And how long did it take to get the final product up and going and available for agency use?
Oh, that's a great question.
So thank you, Corey. I'll fill that one. So we actually have a staff of 3 that's our engagement as well as FEVS staff and data analytics. So we're a whopping size of 3. But we do pull in people like at heights. So, for example, during FEVS season, when we're doing marketing, we pull folks in to work with us, as well as when it's time to get the results out, we work with other folks as well, kind of on a detailed kind of timing. In terms of how long does it take, so Jason is the analytics person, and he started building the OMR 2015, and every year he's managed to come up with some really good enhancements. So on his off time, quote unquote, he spends time during the off season making enhancements to the existing OMR. So it probably, I'd say, a couple of months at least, like for your enhancements. Would you agree to that?
Less than a month.
Okay. So but he's totally dedicated to analytics and his database building. So that's when you have somebody who's sincerely dedicated and he's all in. Jason's highly engaged and all in. So he puts a lot of time into it.
And then regarding the focus, like taking that data and putting it into play and working, interpreting it and working with our program leadership to use it to develop strategies and action plans, that is also probably about a month and a half worth of effort as well. It really depends on the size of the organization and the number of focus groups. But looking individually at the organization's data, integrating that data into our focus group Gallup template, and then actually executing the focus groups, that does take a little bit of time, probably about a month and a half, all told.
And also with the focus group sessions, we utilize folks from our division, our employee development specialists and organizational development specialists. They do a lot of the facilitating of the focus group sessions. So it's not just the 3 of us that are working on that.
All right, sounds good. I just Corey again. Just wanted to add to that. One of the things that we discovered with thinking about developing our tool for supervisors, that sometimes the supervisor, although the tool is intent to empower the supervisor, in the sake of from the perspective of some organizations not necessarily having some of the more robust resources that John teams have or Department of Energy have in the power of 3 and those who are on an ad hoc basis, but understanding where there are potential opportunities even for a supervisor to be able to do certain things on their own, but then also identify key potential individuals, whether it's in their Office of Human Capital or other program areas that may be of interest that can assist them with that process. And those are also, again, some of the things that we outlined in the tool when it comes to helping a supervisor think about, based on their unique challenge, their unique goals, how they can, tap other resources and others with certain skill sets across the agency that help them with their efforts. But all excellent questions. Alexis, what else you got?
There are two more that I think are really, really relevant to the presentation that I hope we have time for. One is, do you have any recommended strategies for managers to assist with communicating continued low responses? In particular, this person asked about low responses from the Employee Engagement Index on the FEV. Do you have any recommended strategies for managers who have to work on communicating sort of a short history of continued low responses and how they can do that while motivating engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Corey. I take the first stab at that, and then ask John and Kimberly and Jason if they want to chime in. But I think Kimberly said it best when she referred to communication. And one of the things that we have identified, again, not only within things that they have witnessed empirically in their organization, but what we see consistently across the data is transparency is critical, whether it's the good, the bad, the ugly, when it comes to truly building an effective relationship between the management and their staff, or supervisor and staff, when they're on their employee engagement journey, if you will. Again, we do understand that sometimes that uh, there may be some hesitation when it comes to the ideal or perceived reaction or forecasted reaction when it comes to low results. However, at the end of the day, employees truly do appreciate when management is number one, forthright, transparent, and very open and transparent about their intentions behind the transparency. And those intentions ideally being, we've identified this as an issue and we need your support to fix it. And it's, being transparent and consistently transparent and being open to the feedback from employees within that process is also important. So it's not only the communication going out from the supervisor, but that supervisor also being open to hearing the feedback that's being communicated back to the supervisor as far as understanding what's going on beyond the numbers is critical, again, with developing that relationship and then trying to develop some solutions on, all right, what do we do to move forward? Uh, John or Jason, Kimberly, anything to add?
Sure, Corey. I'll add some comments to that. I agree with with everything that you said, and from a leader, myself leading my own organization, I think openness, transparency are two critical factors to driving change. Whether that change is starting from a very low engagement score or even from a high engagement score, and being able to change the organization so you can maintain that. I'll add one other element to that, and that's ownership. I think it's really important to demonstrate ownership of the culture that you are leading or that you are a part of. As Kimberly and Jason's comments have pointed out, engagement is not owned by one individual. It's a collective ownership. It is a reflection of the organization that you are working in, and you are part of that organization, meaning you are part of that culture, meaning you are part of whatever engagement strengths or challenges that organization is facing. And so owning that is central to success. And so from where we sit, being able to take ownership of the data, this is what my employees are saying about me, or this is what my colleagues are saying about me, or this is what we are saying about ourselves. Being able to take ownership of that leads to communication about why do we feel this way, what is going on organizationally, environmentally, that is leading us to feel this way, to have these perceptions, and then transparency and identifying what do we need to do to make the change. What ideas do we have as a collective? What ideas do you have as an individual that we can put in place that will help drive the change and to be the organization that we're striving to be?
Well, thanks for that additional input, John. We have time for another Alexis.
Okay, this next question has to do with the development of action plans. What kinds of support do you provide organizations sort of over the long term of working on developing and implementing those action plans that were described in the presentation.
Okay. Kimberly?
Thank you, Corey. So, so Alexis, what we try to do with, let's just start with the 2020, which is who the action plan was originally developed for. So we at the Department of Energy, we had a total of X number of organizations that fell into our 2020 category. So what we did with those particular people, or those particular organizations, I'm sorry, from 2018 when we started to today, 2019, having taken the FEVS, the 2019 FEVS, provide overall support for them in the implementation of their action plan. So we also have tried pairing organizations with similarly situated organizations that were higher scoring organizations. So we've had some partnering, we've done some of that. We have also provided continuous feedback to those organizations, giving them information on what they're doing well, and also promoting for them communication. That's one of the biggest pieces. We gave them a lot about low-hanging fruit, and you heard Corey talking about that. If you can get some quick wins in, then your people, from an organizational perspective, your people can see that you're dedicated, that you are all in. And so once your people see that you as a manager or a supervisor are in, there's a higher likelihood for them to get in. And so we've given organizations who are participating, like I said, with the action plans, given them some low-hanging fruit to go with, some initial quick wins, and that's kind of built momentum for them going forward.
Thanks, Kimberly. And one of the things I will share as well from the OPM perspective that we have been open to before in the past is twofold. One, a lot of times we, reach out to agencies, partly like as we're doing right now with Department of Energy, and as we have built a reputation for with others. But one of the things that we try to do to best help serve the employee engagement community is identifying where there's best practices in action planning, then being able to bring that to the forefront, whether it's an event such as what we're hosting right now virtually, in-person workshops, or actually if you're an agency that finds yourself stuck on something and looking for an example or wanting an opportunity to partner with others, really try to help make those connections. So just as a follow-up to that question, that's one of the things we try to do to help support that process along the way from a short-term or a long-term perspective, and encourage anyone at any time to reach out to our customer service inbox if you have an inquiry and seeking support when it comes to implementing, developing those action plans. And I think we have time for one more question, Alexis. Or do we have any more questions?
Okay. Yep, we sure do. One of the questions is regarding the DOE playbook that was described in the presentation. A number of people are really interested in knowing if they can learn more about that playbook, and is it even available to individuals outside of DOE?
That's a good question. Thanks, John.
So I think Corey asked that question in the chat. Actually, he had mentioned that while we were just describing it kind of offline. We're happy to share that. Similar to the OPM toolkit, we need to just go through our clearance process, but I'm not concerned about that. I know we'll get approval to do that, so we absolutely will and can share that, and we'll share that with OPM and then leverage them to help get it out.
Yeah, thanks, John. And one of the things I want to note as well with the toolkit for supervisors, there's going to be an additional resource associated with that website once we launch, and that is going to be a list of tools and best practices that we collect, such as Playbook from Department of Energy and other resources that we identify as we move forward. Again, you can look forward over the coming weeks, ideally before our next webinar, where we will have not only a tool available, but start building our resources of additional tools that we have been able to acquire from other organizations. But all excellent questions, and right now, unfortunately, we are winding down to the last couple of minutes of this virtual session, but definitely appreciate everybody's engagement, everybody's questions. Also, want to note that although your question may have not been addressed in this specific time frame, we do have your name and associated email address based on your registration information. We will review your questions that may not have made it uh, to the open session, but direct it to our staff accordingly and try to provide you with a response. Again, I apologize that we were limited in time and weren't able to be able to answer that question, those particular questions that were not asked at this time. Again, this was one of three of our webinar series over the coming months. Again, our next webinar will be on October 10th. And that webinar will be focused on the framework for presenting FEVS data results to leadership or to leaders. I know we had a audience member earlier asked about how do you communicate unfavorable results to staff or employees. This is a particular webinar where we partner with the Department of Agriculture, where they've developed a framework on how do you communicate unfavorable results to upper management or senior leaders, particularly as it relates to trying to help develop strategies and so forth, and gaining support and providing insights to gain support to champion employee engagement initiatives. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at my screen, it's kind of tiny. On November 7th, it would be our third webinar where we will talk about long-range FEVS planning, FEVS action planning, where we'll be partnering with the Department of Transportation, which will consist of a panel of Department of Transportation members that have engaged in long-term action planning. Again, getting after what I mentioned earlier before, you have your quick wins, your low-hanging fruit that you can focus on, but then really trying to get a fundamental understanding of what it means to conduct those more long-range plans and what is the benefit or the payoff or return on effort when you think about those things that require an effort that are a year or greater than a year in order to drive meaningful change. So if you already haven't, we encourage everyone to register for those webinars and join us at those times. If I failed to mention earlier, I believe I failed to mention earlier, for copies of these slides, they are available at the lower right-hand corner of your screen for download, where you can access these links. Also, we will ensure again that the tools and resources that we mentioned in this webinar, once upon approval for release, will be emailed to you directly to let you know that it's available, and we encourage you all to look through and share broadly as you see fit. And so, again, we want to thank you for your time. And before we wrap up, of course, OPM loves surveys. We would like to use this opportunity to get your feedback on this particular event and help us think about how we can better serve you as you continue with your employee engagement efforts, and give us ideas of what we ideally can maybe do in shaping future content, tools, and resources as we move forward. So there's a link available on your screen. You just simply click the Browse To button, and should take you no longer than 2 minutes to complete. Again, we appreciate your feedback to help us do better. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and this concludes today's webinar.
Thank you once again. That does